I have a rendezvous with death. We'll preserve the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
No fear. No political correctness. No wokeism. You're listening to Underground USA.
Recently, I wrote about the increasing scrutiny facing nonprofit and NGO organizations that receive substantial amounts of taxpayer money to carry out partisan and politically motivated activities, all presented under the guise of philanthropy. Despite the outcry from the connected left over the withdrawal of their funding, the rationale for denying them taxpayer dollars is becoming clearer every day. President Trump has embarked on what he describes as a mission to dismantle the deep state, with his latest focus being the U.S. Agency of International Development, USAID. Radical leftist and Obama holdover Samantha Power, the wife of Cass Sunstein, the co-author of the political book on transformative activism, DOGE, led the USAID until January 20, 2025. Elon Musk, the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, in the Trump administration, has criticized USAID, calling it a ball of worms. This indicates a network of corruption that permeates the organization far beyond mere individual cases of misconduct.
As we dug into USAID, it became clear that this isn't just an apple with a worm in it. We are dealing with a ball of worms. If you find a worm in an apple, you can remove it. But with a ball of worms, there's no saving it. USAID is unfixable. There's no apple left. It's just worms. It needs to be completely eradicated. It's beyond any repair.
And Senator Joni Ernst, a Republican from Iowa, outlined how the USAID has been stonewalling her office for years as she sought documents to audit and account for taxpayer dollars wasted at the agency.
USAID's spending shows a blatant disregard for the wishes of American taxpayers, and it is time to disrupt the system. The agency has been wasting millions of tax dollars on things like tourism in Lebanon, Sesame Street in Iraq, sending Ukrainians to Paris Fashion Week, and so much more. So no more stonewalling. We need to scrutinize every last dollar being spent by this rogue agency.
The involvement of Bill Kristol, a known anti-Trump figure who has received millions from USAID, casts serious doubt on the agency's neutrality and suggests it might be driven by political vendettas. Mike Benz has highlighted how USAID has allegedly funded prosecutors targeting Trump, like Alvin Bragg, through entities such as Fair and Just Prosecution, or FJP, which is significantly funded by both USAID and the Department of Health and Human Services. Fair and Just Prosecution, which operates under the fiscal sponsorship of the Tide Center, is supported not only by USAID, but also benefits significantly from the Open Society Foundations, led by George Soros. They're more than just Soros prosecutors. They're prosecutors linked to USAID, Benz emphasizes, highlighting the substantial impact these organizations exert on American legal proceedings. In 1991, an operative associated with the Defense Intelligence Agency, who will remain nameless due to the sensitive nature of this information, indicated that Teresa Heinz Kerry, the wife of former U.S. Secretary of State and failed Democrat presidential candidate John Kerry, was deeply connected then and likely still is, through the dark money channels that rule the deep state funding machine.
One of the heads of this multi-headed hydra was Soros's Open Society Foundation, which funded drug legalization NGOs in Europe, all web-connected, leading directly into Colombia. These efforts supported the Cocalero movements, the coca leaf growers of Peru and Bolivia, and then legal lawfare support to the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. Having served in and around 5 U.S. embassies from Panama to Kabul, nothing about the conduct of the Department of State or USAID surprises me. But the corruption and abuse of USAID funds going to left-wing media in the US and Britain, such as Politico and the BBC, and who knows yet who else beyond them, must be criminal. It must be seen as political money laundering, especially dark money funding.
The Vera Institute of Justice, another recipient of Open Society Foundation's funds, further entangles this web, getting millions to ostensibly promote fairness and equity in the justice system. However, this funding raises questions about whether these financial ties steer legal outcomes to serve particular political and ideological ends. From 2018 to 2022, USAID and HHS provided substantial funding to the Tide Center, which in turn has supported numerous far-left initiatives including Black Lives Matter, movements to defund the police, pro-abortion advocacy, and aggressive climate change activism, all under the guise of social justice. Moreover, USAID has been accused of spending $20 million on what critics label as hit-piece journalism against Rudy Giuliani. This money was strategically used to support the 2019 impeachment efforts against President Trump. This misuse of taxpayer money for what appears to be partisan political gain starkly illustrates the abuse of power by these government entities. The funding pattern for USAID and HHS to organizations like Tide Center and FJP reveals a troubling integration of government sources, read taxpayer dollars, into political activism. Activism that compromises the impartiality of government agencies and the integrity of the American justice system. This scenario creates a disturbing picture of a government apparatus more engaged in political warfare than in serving the public's interest. So, instead of lending credence and legitimacy to the anti-deportation movement that waves nation-state flags in defiant conquest while existing in our republic illegally, a movement fueled by federal tax dollars, perhaps it's right to question the use of taxpayer dollars to fund such organizations and initiatives. And that's just what the Trump administration and Elon Musk are doing, questioning the legitimacy of spending taxpayer dollars on partisan activism. Personally, I see absolutely nothing wrong with that. When we come back, our segment on America's Third Watch, broadcast nationally from our flagship station WGUL, AM 930 and FM 93.7 in Tampa, Florida.
You're listening to Underground USA.
A free and independent media is the backbone of our great republic. So it's crucial to have media outlets that aren't influenced by big tech censorship or the leftist mainstream media complex. But that means supporting journalistic outlets that bring us the truth without spinning facts to push a narrative. For less than the cost of a cup of coffee once a month at Starbucks, you can support the free speech mission of undergroundusa.com, an independent, reader-supported, and sometimes irreverent podcast and publication that gives you the real story without the bias. Go to undergroundusa.com/UUSA. That's undergroundusa.com/UUSA to receive a 25% discount on an annual subscription, bringing every new podcast and article directly into your email inbox, circumventing the censors and fact-checkers. Remember, knowledge is power, and staying informed is one of the best ways to protect our republic. Go out there and seek the truth, my friends. Subscribe to undergroundusa.com today.
News, insight, passion. AM 930, The Answer.
You know, Frank, again, a lot has happened since we talked on Monday, by the way. And I think that's the way it is with this administration. It seems like every day it's its own little universe of stuff. It's brand new every day, it seems like. But what do you think, to start off this morning, what do you think of some of these Democrats standing there saying that, we're at war and Cory Booker is super mad about all this, I guess, and the list just goes on?
Well, they're anointing themselves with a red flag. Anybody who's upset that ridiculous and unconstitutional spending is happening, it doesn't need to be in office. They're not serving you. They're serving themselves, their special interest, and their party exclusively. So keep screaming, because it puts a spotlight on you. These are the people that have been the problem and are the problem in our government today. They're political charlatans that say they will go to Washington and work for you, when really they're going to Washington to figure out how to fill their pockets. And that's not just rhetoric anymore. You can see how they're filling their pockets. We've always asked the question, Kyle, how the hell do you go to Washington, D.C. and become a multimillionaire on a six-figure salary in the low six figures? Well, now you're finding out why. They've been grifting the entire time. So anybody who's complaining, they're screaming their guilt and complicity in this. And as far as the people who are upset about this, they're the ones that have been getting something for nothing the whole time. While rank and file people go to work, pay their taxes, pay their bills, and live life the way you're supposed to live, the people whining and crying about being defunded are the people who've been living off your back like remora off shark.
Yep.
So with this exposure of all this corruption, all this grifting, all this needless spending, the special interest spending, the people have to continue to get pissed off about this. And you have to start looking at the people who aren't pissed off about this to say, why aren't you pissed off about this?
Indeed. Sometimes, too, I mean, I don't expect them to do this over the Democrat Party headquarters or whatever, the central, the central office. Why would they even say, yeah, there's some of this we really got to get rid of? I'm in agreement. They won't even throw a bone like that. I mean, they are just mad, and they're also trying to base it on the nobody elected Elon Musk, but they elected Donald Trump, and Donald Trump has brought in Elon Musk officially to do this job.
Yeah, nobody elected Dr. Fauci either, but the left stood behind him like you couldn't believe.
Got that right. Yeah.
Or any of the ridiculous DEI hires that were at the cabinet level under Obama and Biden. The guy who ran the nuclear waste program, who showed up bald in a dress. Nobody elected him either.
Right. That's right.
So what surprises me about this is that they're so vocal about it. That's the dumbest move I've ever seen anybody in Democrat hierarchy make, is to scream about, you can't take away my grift, because that's pretty much what they're saying. You've exposed our con game, and now you want to take away our 3 cards? Well, that can't, no. I need my 3 cards to continue the grift, is what they're screaming when they're protesting the elimination of waste. We're in a sea of change here, Kyle, and it's a beautiful change. It's a beautiful change. No more $600 hammers. No more $700 lunches. But it's not going to be an easy road. And as you can see, if I'm Elon Musk, I'm tripling down on my personal security.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because there was that tweet that went out, saying wanted dead or alive. And that's a call to action. I mean, I think that goes beyond typically what we might call the First Amendment. Well,
it would. It's a death threat, and those are illegal.
Mm-hmm.
I think President Trump has to bestow a more of an official title on him. Senior advisor would be a good one. To afford him not only Secret Service protection, but the penalties that come with Secret Service protection. So if somebody does make a threat like that, the Secret Service can go over there and arrest the person and prosecute him under those laws.
We got Mary sent us a nice direct message here. She says, these left-wingers throw a hissy fit every time something doesn't go their way. They're like spoiled, rotten brats who, when they don't get their way, throw a pouty-faced temper tantrum. Everyone knows what spoiled, rotten brats look and act like. They'll give you an I'll show you attitude out there. I think she's got it right on the money.
Yeah, and how do you deal with a temper tantrum? You discipline the child. And there's a million ways to discipline the child. If you're going to act like a child, you're going to get treated like a child. So I guess the Democrats should be in timeout.
That is that's wonderful. I love this idea. I really do. Well, Frank, too, we're talking about waste and abuse in finances, in money going out to these places and across over the sea and this kind of stuff. But also people like Pam Bondi over at the Justice Department, she's got her hands full to try to root out waste and abuse of another type, and that is, people who are just not going to be with the program or would actively work against the Trump agenda. Similar for Kash Patel, assuming he gets confirmed here at the FBI, trying to make sense of all of those issues there. Again, they will go against directly the Trump agenda.
And it's being publicized now that because Trump's doing it, it's this shock of shocks that happens when an outsider come in, but that's not the case. When you look at any time a Democrat administration takes power in Washington, D.C., there's a culling. This idea that you have to hold somebody over, and we hear that all the time. My God, how many times did we hear that during George W. Bush's administration? Well, in order to be bipartisan, you have to keep some of the people from the Clinton administration. Otherwise, you're just a totalitarian. Well, when Democrats take power, they get rid of everybody. Everybody across the board. If you belong to the previous administration, you're gone. And Republicans have come to understand this, so they don't whine. They know their tenure's coming to an end. They get ready. Their boxes are packed on January 20th. But for some reason, the media and the left and the special interests expect that there should be some people to hold over into the next Republican administration, because otherwise, how would you know how it works? We have to be there to help show you how it works. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Well, yeah, it does. And it works a lot better. Call them all. If you're a political appointee, you should have your boxes packed on Inauguration Day. There shouldn't be any, he's a holdover or she's a holdover. No holdovers. And they've proven they can't be trusted in the last Trump administration. If you're a holdover, you got to go. If you're a political appointee from several administrations back that was of the progressive ilk, you got to go. Because we're not doing that anymore. It doesn't work. It's not that Trump has this agenda against anybody who didn't stand with him before. It's that it didn't work. The economy was worse. The debt is larger. We lost stature around the world. So every time you keep a holdover, you're throwing another log onto that fire of decline. We can't do that. We're making a jagged turn here from what the status quo is. And that's why you're hearing all the screaming, Kyle, is because the deep state doesn't like it. It's like Mary said, there's those petulant children that were so used to getting everything they wanted. And now we're saying, well, no, that's enough candy for you. No more candy. You're 10 years old and you're 200 pounds. No, it's time. You're going to eat your broccoli and shut up.
I like your metaphor. Absolutely. And as well, Frank, there's so many different fronts that the administration has to deal with, not the least of which, of course, is the border. But as an extension of that, criminal aliens that are here among us all through the country. I don't think there's probably an area where we don't have those who are going to be deported for one reason or another in terms of their status of already being a criminal or having committed crimes in addition to crossing the border illegally. But evidently now the first 12 or a dozen, we understand, that are being already sent to Guantanamo Bay. And they're readying it to service even thousands more, it seems like. President Trump is pretty serious about this. Well,
and as well he should be. Criminal aliens have to go first. But that doesn't mean that anybody here legally who commits a crime shouldn't be incarcerated either. And I think we have to extend that kind of mentality into the mainstream lexicon. We're a nation of laws, not a nation of men. In administrations past, particularly Clinton, Obama, and Biden, we've found excuses for people so that we can be a nation of men and not of laws. And that's termed as the victimhood mentality. That can't be anymore. If we're running a country based on merit, then merit it shall be. And that means laws have teeth. If you've broken the law and you're not supposed to be here, you are of the highest order needed to be dealt with. If you are a citizen and you've broken the law and order's coming after you. It's time to not do that anymore. It's time to not selectively enforce the law anymore. You know, I'm not saying go out there and write the tickets for people who are going 3 miles an hour over the limit. But the people who've grafted on their taxes, like Hunter Biden, he shouldn't get a pass.
Mm-hmm.
I was glad to see that the former senator from New Jersey is going away for 11 years. About freaking time. You know, and now what do we do with the people who are thumbing their nose who were in those highest circles of the deep state? Are we going to look at people like who were in the Obama administration and the Clinton administration who grafted just as horribly as Menendez did? We probably should. If we're going to set an example that this doesn't happen anymore, and there's a new sheriff in town, you have to handcuff some people who've got some pretty large status. Not because it's retribution. And to anybody who's saying Trump is doing retribution, you're a fool. Mm-hmm. You're a fool. It's not retribution to enforce the law.
Well, exactly. But see, that's why they set it up as retribution. You know, here comes Donald Trump. He arrests anybody. It's retribution. And we told you so. And it just becomes fodder for these, the cable shows and the View and stuff like that. But I'm really hoping, Frank, that people will not buy that anymore because they're seeing this house of cards literally just come down, and it's Donald Trump who's saying, see, I told you so.
And I'll tell you what, if it wasn't for platforms like X and talk radio, this wouldn't be a big news story as it is, because the mainstream media would have jammed it down into the last minute of the broadcast at 10 o'clock at night. So thank you, Elon Musk, and thank you, everybody in Washington, D.C., who's fighting for free airwaves when it comes to radio, because this is how we don't let them get away with it.
Yep, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And again, you know, it's something also, you know, they just don't understand it. I think the left doesn't understand just how much the general public, you know, turns to resources like this, like us on the radio here right now, to get this kind of information and to keep it going.
That's why free speech is so important to protect.
You know, Frank, obviously, you know, we've talked about Gitmo, we've talked about the DOGE, we've talked about, you know, how the Democrats on the left are just absolutely apoplectic. But also, of course, something else that sent everybody, and I mean even Saudi Arabia, into orbit was this idea that Donald Trump said, hey, maybe we could develop Gaza and make it a show place and find another place for the Palestinians to live because, well, it's unlivable for a long, long time in Gaza. What do you think about all that?
Well, that's part of what's coming out later on today over at Underground USA is the subject of why the Arab world won't absorb their Muslim brethren.
Bingo. Yeah.
I mean, it truly is in the Quran. There are several sections that mandate that Muslims take care of other Muslims. So the Palestinians, being Islamic, that shouldn't be an issue. That Jordan, Egypt, or Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, any of the places in the Middle East, Kuwait, UAE, they should be absorbing these refugees into their homelands because they're fellow Muslims. but they're not. Why? Because the Palestinians are an uncooperative and violent people. Everywhere they go, those governments have a problem with them. We saw it in Jordan. We saw it in Egypt. They don't want them because they're trouble. Because their only avenue for conflict resolution is violence and terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
So what country in their right mind would want to absorb them? That's why, the United States have to take in the refugees from the Palestinian refugees. No, we don't. We really don't.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the history of the so-called Palestinian people, because there was never a country named Palestine. I'm sorry. It's an offshoot word from the Roman word Philistine, which meant enemy of the state.
Mm-hmm. Right. Back in Bible times. And so
yeah, back in the Roman times. Just because it was codified and kept in history in the Bible doesn't make it a religious thing. It's a part of history, and if you go back into the history of the Palestinian people, it goes back to a land called Syria Palestina, which was created by the Romans to tick off the Jewish community in that region by naming it something that was antithetical to everything that they believed. So this idea that other Arab nations won't help their own speaks volumes about why Israel's had such a problem with the Palestinians in the first place. Mm-hmm. And as to Donald Trump's saying, let's do something with Gaza to make it something that's nonviolent and profitable and that thrives. What the hell's wrong with that?
Well, no, exactly right. I mean, and he does paint in broad strokes, but he gets the conversation started in this idea of what if? What if we didn't go back to the way that it was? Because it seems to me, Frank, that many times the powers that be just want to put everything back the way it was in the Middle East and let that pressure cooker start pressure cooking again, and eventually it'll boil over, it'll blow up, and it'll explode, just like it did on October 7th. And it seems to me that every administration over decades now has had to make their requisite, hey, we got to do a two-state system with you guys. Oh, you won't want to do that? Okay, well, I tried. In the next administration, and everybody knows now the two-state system is a no-go.
You saw it almost immediately after Trump floated the idea of Gaza not going back to what it was. The governments of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan all said, unacceptable, will not happen. We want the borders back to 1967.
Right.
Well, if that's the case, then every border has to go back to a certain point in time. That means there is no spoils of war. The Arab world went after Israel in the very beginning, and Israel kicked their butts. And therefore, to the victor goes the spoils.
Like Jerusalem. Yeah.
Yeah. You lost. There are consequences for attacking other countries and losing. And
Mm-hmm.
these are the consequences. So, no, there is no going back to 67. And if you're bright, you don't want to go back to what Gaza was. You want it to be something that thrives. But the Palestinian people, by virtue of the fact that their elections always fall into the hands of radicals that want to use violence and terrorism against not only the Jewish state, but the free world, who would want that?
Yeah.
Who, in their right mind, would say, yeah, let's go back to that.
Yeah.
Let's go back to buses blowing up in the middle of Tel Aviv. That sounds like a good plan.
Right. Exactly. Because, even when it comes to the two-state solution, I heard it described like this a long, long time ago. They're not the size of Israel is not what is at issue with the terrorists. They don't care what the borders are. They want Israel gone. They want to drive it into the sea. And you're right. It will never, ever let up. And that's why I think making some bold change is maybe the only way to go.
There has to be a bold change. There has to be a dramatic pivot if you want the status quo not to remain. That simply has to be. And, the only people talking about a two-state solution are the people who are not in the Palestinian camp. When you read what Hamas's charter, there is no two-state. They don't want it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want a two-state solution. That's a Western idea. Let's do a two-state thing where we can have a violent state living next to a peaceful state, and we'll just cross our fingers and hope that buses don't start exploding all over the place, because diplomacy's worked so well with the Palestinians in the past.
Right.
It doesn't work. That's why the dramatic pivot is needed if you want peace. And sometimes when you have a nation-state kind of actor in the Palestinian Authority who is always 100% thumping the drums of war and terrorism, you have to address them as the people who are thumping war and terrorism, and they must be expunged. That's not a call for genocide. It's a call for taking the militants within that population and saying you have to be held accountable for your actions.
Right.
I'm not saying every Palestinian is someone who wants to strap on a bomb vest and go running through a McDonald's in Tel Aviv and blow it up. What I'm saying is those people need to be freed from the tyrants that stain them with that reality.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and that's part of the thing, too. Many of the Palestinians, because of Hamas that you're talking about, they literally rule over them. They're just props to them or human shields, and it's never going to get better if they continue to be able to rule like that.
And when you brainwash your children in school from kindergarten all the way to high school to say, it's okay to strap on a bomb vest, little Muhammad, as long as you're screaming Allah Akbar and you run towards a Jew, you're doing a good job and you'll be rewarded in heaven. That kind of crap is what needs to be expunged. They're stealing the minds of children. And that in itself is a crime.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right about that. And even just the other day when they were releasing the hostages, or a few, there was 4 about over a week ago and another one, I think this last weekend. It's this big production, and they have all of their fighters with their masks on and everything, and their rocket launchers and their pickup trucks, and they really think that they're putting on this big show, but it's terrible.
There is something intrinsically wrong with a deal that says, we'll give you 3 hostages, you give us 180.
Yep.
Anybody in their right mind anywhere in the world, if you said, I'll tell you what, we've got a deal. Well, it's a great deal for both of us. I'll give you $3, you give me 180. Does that sound even remotely like something you want to enter into?
Nope, not in the least.
That's because they value death more than they value life. They don't really care about their hostages. They want them released. They know the West says those 3 people, they have families, they have children, they have mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, daughters and sons. They want them very badly, so we're going to leverage that.
Yeah.
Give me the 180 that blew everything up, and we'll give you 3.
It's abominable.
You're listening to Underground USA.
Some people won't give you the real talk on drugs, but it's time we know the facts. Fentanyl is killing people. It's a powerful opioid, often made illegally and commonly mixed with illicit drugs. It can even be pressed into counterfeit pills that resemble prescription medications. Just 2 milligrams, about the size of a few grains of sand, could potentially be lethal. This isn't an ad to scare you, but it is an ad to make you think twice. Get the facts. Go to realdealonfentanyl.com.
Don't let biased algorithms, or degree screens, or exclusive professional networks, or stereotypes. Don't let anything keep you from discovering the half of the workforce who are stars. Workers skilled through alternative routes rather than a bachelor's degree. It's time to tear the paper ceiling and see the stars beyond it. Find out how you can make stars part of your talent strategy at tearthepaperceiling.org. Brought to you by Opportunity at Work and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Underground USA.
Before we go, a few words on the Arab world's flat-out refusal to take Palestinians into their homelands and the hypocrisy of elitist Islam. Earlier this week, President Trump proposed relocating Palestinians to neighboring countries during a reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. shrieks of rejection of the idea and a determined voice for a two-state solution rang out from the usual suspect Middle Eastern players, including Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, with Jordan threatening war with Israel should any Palestinians be forcibly relocated onto their sovereign soil. As I wrote in April of 2024, in a piece titled The Palestinian Genesis and Their False Claim to Israeli Land, the so-called Palestinian people are not from a nation-state origin. Historically, there was no Palestine. Instead, they were a demographic designation bestowed upon lesser thans and former prisoners and slaves of the Romans, Philistines, who originally emanated from Crete and other Aegean origins. So, if history is to matter, the creation of a two-state solution, as lusted for by the Arab world, would be to create a nation out of thin air, something that wasn't even done when the UN mandated the creation of Israel after World War II. Now, a little bit of history to back up that statement, again from my April 2024 piece. 200 years after the life of Jesus, the geopolitical landscape in Judea was mainly shaped by the consequences of the Jewish-Roman wars. These wars left Judea in ruins, with its population significantly reduced and its culture transformed. The Romans, led by Emperor Hadrian, responded not only with military force, but also with symbolic gestures aimed at erasing the identity of the rebellious Jewish province. To suppress any further nationalistic fervor and wipe out the memory of the Jewish revolts, Emperor Hadrian renamed Judea Syria Palestina. This renaming was both a political and cultural attempt to diminish Jewish ties to the land. The term Palestina was derived from the Philistines, the ancient enemies of the Israelites, adding an additional layer of insult to the injury. This change marked a significant turning point in the region's history, as it was an early example of the use of cultural and psychological warfare, as well as a form of cultural genocide in imperial politics. So, when history is recounted accurately, there never was a Palestine, and there should be no right of return. Additionally, if the so-called Palestinian people really wanted to return to their homeland, they would be seeking to return to Crete and the Aegean region, where they actually have ancestral roots. To enrich these truths, we turn to the words of the Quran, which, to a devout Muslim, are the literal words of Allah and are not open to interpretation. In Surah al-Hujurat, the 49th chapter, or Surah, of the Quran, it clearly states,
"The believers are but brothers, so make settlement between your brothers, and fear Allah that you may receive mercy."
This verse defines the relationship between Muslims as one of brotherhood, implying the duty of care and reconciliation. So, by the commandment of their God, Allah, all nation-states calling themselves Muslim or Islamic must accept their brethren, for it is the word and will of their God. Yet, Islamic-based nations like Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia is the land of Mecca and Medina, the two holiest sites in Islam. Those countries who pontificate about their fidelity to Islam refuse to come to the aid of their Muslim brothers by absorbing them into their lands. So, we have two hypocrisies. On the one hand, the Arab world rejects the nation-state of Israel, claiming it is nothing more than a political creation, even as they champion the creation of a nation-state for the so-called Palestinians. On the other hand, we have a predominantly Muslim Arab world that claims to hold Islam as the only legitimate religion in the world, even as they blatantly ignore the edicts in their holy scriptures that mandate they care for their own. While there's a lot of talk about sympathy and or solidarity with the Palestinian cause, the policies of many, if not all, of the Middle Eastern governments reflect a more realistic approach to national security and stability. There's a fear among Arab states that accepting Palestinian refugees could mean importing militant groups like Hamas, which is seen as a destabilizing force. Previous examples of taking in Palestinians have been fraught with challenges. Jordan encountered significant issues with Palestinian groups in the late 1960s and early 1970s, leading to the conflict known as Black September. And Lebanon's civil war, from 1975 to 1990, was significantly exacerbated by the presence of Palestinian factions, which turned parts of Lebanon into bases for attacks on Israel, contributing to the country's instability. The bottom line is that the Arab world, the Islamic Arab world, doesn't want to take in any Palestinians because the Palestinians are a violent and uncooperative people who see conflict resolution only in the use of guns, bombs, and terrorism. When history is recounted correctly, today's aggression by the Palestinian people and their sympathetic Islamic terror organizations Hamas and Hezbollah will be understood to be nothing more than an Islamofascist desire to establish the global caliphate as mandated by the Quran, starting with Israel, a caliphate under which the nations and people of the world would be required to bow down in subservience to Islam. Now, wouldn't it be better to send a strong message to the Palestinians and the Islamic world that we, the free people of the world, are not on board with this totalitarian bullshit? Wouldn't it be better to stop placating the unhinged notion that somehow the aggressors, read Palestinians, are somehow the victims? The fact that the Islamic nations of the Middle East refuse to absorb their Palestinian brethren in their time of self-created need speaks volumes about the Palestinian people.
You're listening to Underground USA.
Wokeism is a threat to the very foundations of our great nation and to the very principles of liberty and justice. The goal of wokeism is to divide us, pitting Americans against one another based on race, gender, and identity. This ideology undermines free speech and open dialogue, which are the bedrock of our republic. It promotes censorship and cancels anyone who dares to challenge its extreme agenda. We must stand against this cultural Marxism and protect our constitutional rights. Say no to wokeism.
The foundation of our great nation lies in our unwavering commitment to freedom, and at its core is the principle of free speech. It's not just a right, but a duty to speak our minds, respectfully debate, and challenge ideas. Today, free speech is under attack by the forces of the deep state and the globalists. We must all do our part to protect free speech, for without it, we'd be lost in a sea of woke conformity and censorship. We have the right. Protect it.
If you like the podcast, please head on over to undergroundusa.com and sign up for our Substack. It brings every new podcast and article directly into your email inbox, circumventing the censors and fact-checkers. And remember to talk politics, current events, and religion with your family, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. When we have these conversations, we find out we have more in common than we have in difference, and that frustrates the living hell out of the deep state dividers who seek to balkanize us so they can cobble together that 51% during election season. It's what we can do to preserve the republic. Thank you for downloading, listening, and sharing. You're listening to Underground USA. My name is Frank Salvato. No fear, no political correctness, and no wokeism.